if the government was brave enough to impose those sorts of rules and conditions on this industry, which we're all obligated to contribute to anyway because it's mandatory. Hey, this is Chris from Stockspot. Now, you've probably heard recently in the US about this new initiative that Donald Trump has set up as part of his presidency, where he's appointed Elon Musk as the head of the DOGE initiative, or the Department of Government Efficiency. And really, this is a new department that's set up to critique and look into where the government's spending its money, to really minimize waste and improve efficiency, and ultimately help to reduce their overall deficit, reduce how much money they owe to the rest of the world, and get that number down over time. And it made me think, well, what if we did something in Australia that was similar to that, but applied to our superannuation system? You know, one of the areas in Australia where there is a lot of waste. And so I had a look into the two biggest areas where I see waste in the super system to imagine what a DOGE-like approach would mean for the super system in Australia. And the first area of a big amount of waste in the super system is investment fees. So we know in Australia there's about $32 billion spent on super fees each year, of which some of that is admin fees, but about $25 billion goes into investment fees, paying fund managers to essentially pick stocks or pick bonds or other assets to go into portfolios. Now, if all of that money, instead of going into active management, where it's a zero-sum game anyway and everyone's getting the average return, if instead of that it went into index funds, it would reduce the investment costs by about $15 billion a year. $15 billion it would save. And consumers wouldn't be worse off because they'd still be getting the average returns, which they're already getting. So if you look at that $15 billion and then say, okay, we'll save $15 billion that goes back into people's super, growing at about 8% per year, that actually sums up to about $235 billion over the next year, could be saved if the government forced super funds to push money into low-cost indexing, or they ran a tender process, which would introduce more competition into super pricing. The second area where super funds could be cutting back on excess waste is in advertising. So super funds spend over $400 million a year on advertising, according to the latest statistics by the regulator, APRA. That's on sponsorships, on media, on advertising. And again, this is a zero-sum game. For every fund member that goes from one fund, they're coming to another fund and vice versa. So it doesn't actually have any net benefit to members. And there's very little correlation between super funds that are spending more on advertising and their member growth anyway. So this is an area that could easily be cut with no consumer harm at all, saving consumers, let's say if they imposed a cap of $1 million per fund on advertising, which is still a lot, that would save members about $350 million a year. Compounding that out, imagine that money goes back into everyone's super accounts and grows at 8% a year for the next 10 years. That would be a total saving of just over $5 billion over the next 10 years. And if you add the investment saving of $235 billion with the $5 billion that would be saved on reducing marketing waste within super in Australia, that's a $240 billion pot that goes back into everyone's savings, goes back into people's pensions, reduces the imposition on social security in Australia, and would have a huge benefit for our country if the government was brave enough to impose those sorts of rules and conditions on this industry, which we're all obligated to contribute to anyway because it's mandatory. So if I was working in the DOGE initiative within Australia, that's where I'd be focused, in saving $240 billion in our superannuation system.